Ontario.
Other Nature Golf members, my name is Sally, and in a little bit you'll meet my friend Kevin, and we're from a program called Wild Ontario. Now, most of you are probably familiar with Wild Ontario, but we are an education program that travels across the province of Ontario, teaching about nature and the cool animals that live in everyone's backyards and around our province. Now, when we go and teach people about nature, I like to believe that we can be pretty interesting and entertaining, but we do bring along a few special guests that makes things a little bit more interesting. Now, the animals that we bring along with us to teach people about nature belong to a special group of birds called birds of prey, or raptors more specifically. Now, we call these guys raptors because they are a special group of hunting birds that hunt using their raptorial feet. And so they all have these big feet, strong talons, and strong grabbing feet for hunting. And today we're actually going to focus on a group of raptors that I believe everybody loves, the owls. And I think Kevin is ready to bring out our first friend.
Thank you so much, Sally, for the intro. Hello, Nature Guelph members. I'd like to introduce you to my good friend, Newton. Newton here is an eastern screech owl. They're one of the most common species, excuse me, of owl that you can find here in Ontario. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about today is actually a really cool ability that Newton has. It's his ability to camouflage. Now you might say, looking at him on my glove next to me, that he doesn't really quite blend in very well in our facility, but out in the wild, you could imagine that the pattern of his feathers is going to look really, really similar to a lot of tree bark. And so when Newton is out in the wild, especially in the daytime, because he's going to be most active at night, he's going to want to be a little bit more hidden so that nothing that maybe wants to eat him is going to be able to find him. And so you could imagine he's looking very comfortable, he's looking very puffy and very round. And so if he were to be sitting inside a hole, an open face in a tree, he's going to fill up that space, get nice coverage so that there's no gaps. And all of the patterns of his feathers are going to make it look like he blends in perfectly like the rest of the tree. And so he's going to be able to take a snooze all throughout the day and not have to worry too much about somebody finding him. Owls also camouflage for another reason, though, one that people maybe don't necessarily always think about, and Sally is going to talk a little bit later about an owl who uses this strategy. But owls will also camouflage so that they actually aren't seen by their prey during the day. So it's not super common that predators utilize camouflage. It's oftentimes an adaptation used to protect yourself from a potential predator like Newton's. But because owls hunt at night, they don't have necessarily somewhere like a house where they can go and hide from the outside world. They have to still be exposed to the elements. And so an owl that is a primary predator of lots of other food are going to want to be able to blend in so that the prey they want to hunt at night can't see them and know to avoid the area, but also so that other birds don't find them out and try to scare them away from their territory. Now Newton here, he's one of my favorite birds that we have in our program. He is non-releasable, so Newton actually has a bit of an interesting story. He was born out in the wild, but he was brought in to a wildlife rehab facility with a wing injury of sort of unknown origin. It's not entirely uncommon for a bird like Newton to get hit by a car or something like that. We don't know for sure what happened to him, but it's not out of the ordinary for something like that to happen. But he went into the rehab. He actually recovered quite well, and they released him back out into the wild. But unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, he wound up back at the rehab again with another wing injury and a leg injury this time as well. And so the folks at the rehab decided, we gave him one chance, we let him back out, but it seems clear that he's not going to be able to survive well enough on his own, and so he's going to need to find another place to live. And so now Newton lives with us, where he can work as an educational ambassador to hopefully teach people all about these cool little owls that we have in Ontario. And so Sally is going to come and talk about, another very cool owl, maybe on the opposite end of the size spectrum, who you might be able to hear as she comes in now.
Awesome, thanks so much, Kevin. All right, now here I have Einstein, obviously a much bigger owl than Newton, maybe Ontario's largest owl species, the great horned owl. Now Einstein, it's kind of cool to be able to hear her be a little bit talkative. She's hooting at our cameraman behind the phone there. Now, Einstein is called a great horned owl because she's pretty big, right? In nature, when we have a big animal, we usually call them great animals, and she has horns, I guess. But they're not really horns on the top of her head, obviously. They're simply feather tufts. Now, a lot of people will also call them ear tufts, but that's not actually where Einstein's ears are either. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, when we look at Einstein, I think she's amazing, right? I could look at her all day long with that crazy plumage, those patterns on her feathers, the colors and patterns of her feathers. It makes her look just like a tree bark, just like Newton would camouflage into a nice big forest, and she would be hidden away from all those crazy blue jays and squirrels and red-tailed hawks that are trying to chase her out away from her home. Now, the other thing that I notice about Einstein when I look at her are those huge, huge eyes in the front of her face. Those big golden eyes are super noticeable when you first look at Einstein, and that helps her see very well, right? All owls have this amazing ability to see when there's not a lot of light outside, when it's pretty dark outside, obviously, being nocturnal creatures. But those huge eyes are so big that it also doesn't leave a lot of space in her skull for something else, a brain. And a lot of the times people will laugh when we talk about that because you hear about owls and you hear about owls being the wise old owl, or you see them in pictures, books, and storybooks about being the smart creature. But because her eyes are so big, she actually doesn't have that much space for a skull. But that's okay. She doesn't have to be smart. She doesn't have to, do math or read a book or do puzzles. As long as she can see very well with those huge eyeballs. She can hear very well with her amazing ability of hearing, where owl ears are kind of weird. Right? We talked about those feather tufts not being actually where her ears are. So where are they? Well, they're actually just right where that dark facial disc ends. And she has one ear that's a bit higher up and points upwards, and another ear that's a bit lower down and points downwards. That sounds kind of weird, but it gives her this amazing ability to be able to pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from. Because she has offset ears, she can not only hear left and right, but up and down as well, in order to be able to locate exactly where a sound is coming from. Even just by listening for, let's say, a mouse's heartbeat under a pile of leaves, she can probably hunt for that mouse just by listening for its location, not even seeing that mouse. Talkative. Now, Einstein, she actually is pretty talkative because Einstein is what we call a human imprinted bird. So just like the rest of the birds here at Wild Ontario, they are all non-releasable for one reason or another. Einstein, she actually wasn't raised out in the wild. She and her two other siblings, as baby owls, were sitting in a nest on a tree that was resting against a farmer's barn. And so that farmer, not knowing that there was a nest on that tree, he cut down that tree. And then he realized that there was a nest with some baby owls in them. Now, the farmer actually did the right thing. He left the owls to see if the mother owl would come back. But unfortunately, she didn't. So he did the next best thing, and that is to bring Einstein and her siblings to a rehab center or a wildlife hospital. Unfortunately, Einstein, being the oldest of her siblings, she actually imprinted on the doctors there at the hospital that she was brought to. And what that simply means is that Einstein, in that tiny little brain of hers, she doesn't fully understand that she's an owl because she didn't grow up around her mother owl. And at a very, very young age, within just a few months old, she looked up and she saw these doctors. And so she kind of thinks that she looks like you and me. And so she can be a bit more chatty amongst her beings, I guess. Now, that's a little bit about Einstein and why she's here at the program. But I want to thank you guys for joining us today and meeting Einstein and also Newton, the screech owl, one or two of our 15 animal ambassadors, part of Wild Ontario. So I want to thank you guys again. I hope you learned something new. I hope you enjoy the rest of your members' night.